What is up, Steelers Nation? Thank you so much for jumping on to another episode of All Steelers Talk. I'm Noah Strackbine, joined by my main man, Steven Thompson. Find us on youtube.com/All Steelers Talkers. Subscribe anywhere you get your podcast. The Pittsburgh Steelers, we are days away from rookie minicamp, and man, things are exciting because, well, come Friday, we get to watch some football, and that is as crazy as it gets after a long few months of waiting until this weekend. But before we get there, the Pittsburgh Steelers have some headlines surrounding them right now. One is the wide receiver market, obviously. Tyler Boyd goes to the Tennessee Titans yesterday, leaving the Pittsburgh Steelers really with one option if they're going to add to their wide receiver room, and maybe we're not totally convinced that they're going to at this point in the offseason. Then there's a trade on the line, or I guess not on the line, a hypothetical brought to everyone's attention that the Pittsburgh Steelers might be able to get rid of their starting left tackle and make some room for rookie Troy Fautanu, and we'll dive into that. And then obviously it's rookie minicamp, so we're going to talk some rookie minicamp. Our favorite UDFA to make the roster, we'll dive into that, plus more. It's been a beautiful week here in the Berg. We are days away from actual football. How you feeling, my friend?
I'm feeling good. This is kind of this is a kind of football that I really enjoy because as kind of a college football dork, you get to pick out some of these names that you recognize from, maybe some of these smaller schools, like people that you've heard of that you thought that always get treated like, oh, they're awesome college players, but they'll never make it in the NFL. And you get to like not play around with them, but you get to enjoy the fact that, oh, these guys got a chance to play at the NFL. Like none of you guys know these guys, but I've watched this guy for, 3 or 4 years or whatever, and he's awesome. Like, and now I get to see him kind of on a different stage. So I'm really enjoying this. I think this is going to be a lot of fun at rookie minicamp this weekend.
100%. You got a guy there from Pitt showing up, Marquez Williams. What should Steelers fans expect from that guy? You think he's got a shot to get an invite to regular OTAs and minicamp?
Yeah, I do, honestly. I mean, I think Marquez is a ton of fun. Talks a lot of trash.
I was going to say, definitely a talkative guy.
Yeah, I remember seeing one headline from when he got signed. They described him as feisty, which I think is exactly the right idea. Only about 5'8", small, but I think strong and plays like above it, like kind of punches above his weight a little bit. I think definitely a slot candidate. But I think he absolutely has a chance. I think you turn on the film and he definitely is able to stack up with some of those bigger guys that he's had to face on the outside. Will it translate to the NFL? I don't know, but I think Marquez is a good dude. Love talking to him. He always gives you a good quote. So I'm really excited to see Marquez in action and hear from him this weekend.
Yeah, he's one of those guys where I don't think everybody in the Steelers media is going to know because most of them also cover the University of Pittsburgh. So they're going to have an idea of what they're getting into, but there's going to be those national guys, The Athletic, ESPN, who just ignore that. And everybody else is going to be like, why is there a swarm around Williams over there? And it's going to be because that guy's giving you great quotes. That guy's there's something coming out of his mouth that you're very excited to hear. But he's a humble dude. Like, you meet him for 2 seconds. He's one of the nicest guys that I've met covering the Pitt Panthers in the last couple of years. And very excited to see what he can bring to the Steelers. There's a bunch of them. And we'll dive into those guys a little bit later in the show. We're going to start with Tyler Boyd going to the Tennessee Titans. The Steelers were reportedly in on this guy to some degree for some of the offseason. Then that interest faded. There was rumors out there that he got a deal for 2 years, $10 million from the Steelers. Well, he signs a 1-year, $4.5 million deal with the Tennessee Titans instead. So you got to feel that 2-year, $10 million deal was not on the table for Tyler Boyd. He's gone. The market has seemingly evaporated to nothing. Zay Jones is probably the only other option that would come in here and be feasible as a wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3, depending on where you see Roman Wilson. Then there's the trade market. I mean, I got to ask, Tyler Boyd leaves. The options are very limited. Do you still see the Steelers as a team that are looking to add a wide receiver before training camp, before OTAs, before minicamp?
I mean, I don't know if it was just the options were too limited or the deals weren't good enough, but it doesn't seem like the Steelers are intent on adding another wide receiver. It just hasn't been reflected in the moves that they've made, the aggressiveness that they've shown in going after some big name guys. I mean, I still think that it didn't need to be a star that they need to get. I thought you just needed kind of a wide receiver too, someone who could play off of George Pickens and kind of fit in as a good run blocker in this offense that's going to run the ball a lot. But man, they just don't seem to be aggressive or intent on going after anyone who could really make that much of an impact at all. What it tells me is that they really believe in Roman Wilson. I mean, I kept seeing, a couple headlines the other day, like, oh, maybe we're putting too much on Roman Wilson's plate, a third round rookie. But I mean, the expectations are going to be artificially high because I
Yep.
look at this roster right now and he looks like the second best receiver on the team, at least in terms of talent. So, you're leaning on a really young guy, you're leaning on a really unproven group of receivers, but the Steelers seem very, very comfortable with that. And maybe some surprise trade comes, maybe something that we're not expecting to come happens, but the Steelers seem extremely content with a wide receiver group that, I'll be honest with, it doesn't look very threatening to me at all.
Yeah, I have kind of come to grips that if there's going to be a move, it's going to be a trade, and it's going to be later in the season or later in the summer. But I don't really think that that's like, I think it had all the hype. I think everything that we heard about the situation was real, that the Pittsburgh Steelers were very interested in names like Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel and Cortland Sutton, and they wanted to pursue one of them, and they wanted to make sure that a move could happen. And then they hit a point where they said, okay, this is way too expensive. This is getting crazy. Why we're not gonna make a dumb move for a position that is not a dire need on this team, even if we thought it was a pretty big need. You could still make moves with Roman Wilson and George Pickens and so on and so forth and try to kind of fit the bill. And yesterday I said it, and I kind of feel like I should double down on it, that I think George Pickens could be your number one by the end of the season and be a superstar enough where you feel good about it. And I think the Steelers believe that to the point where they're not going to make a dumb move. They're not just going to go out and sign anybody because they have the money to do so and they have the restructures to do so and they have the draft capital to do so. I think if it doesn't make sense, which nothing seems to have made sense yet, they're gonna let it rock with who they have, with George Pickens, with Roman Wilson, with Calvin Austin and Quez Watkins and Van Jefferson and Cordero Patterson and Pat Freiermuth and Connor Hayward, and they're just gonna make the most out of it. I think that's the direction that they're headed in, and it's worked out in the past. I think that's the other part of this, is that I heard Albert Breer say yesterday on the Pat McAfee show that the last time the Steelers brought in an outside wide receiver who led the team in receiving yards was during World War II. That's how long ago it was. That's a crazy stat. This team has been homegrown wide receivers forever. They make the most out of guys, which is why I still think that you can make the most out of guys like Calvin Austin and then turn Roman Wilson into something big relatively quickly. I mean, you got to remember that, like, back in the day, Antonio Brown was the number one, and Juju Smith-Schuster comes in here and he makes an immediate impact as a second-round pick. So I think Roman Wilson could have that type of impact in his rookie season, and then all you got to do is bank on George Pickens kind of being that superstar.
Yeah, I completely agree on Pickens, and I'm on the record saying that I'm really high on Roman Wilson. I think he can be a reliable number two. It's just It's risky, and I don't think you look at this wide receiver core and I don't know. The Steelers are going to look exactly the same as we kind of expected them to. Like, they are still, you're just doubling down on, man, we better be able to run the football. Like, if they can't run the football, then this is all for naught, because I mean, these receivers, again, like, I wouldn't say unreliable. We need to see them on the field, but you look at the rest of the NFC North, or the AFC North especially. You look at the rest of the AFC. The Steelers are kind of going the opposite direction as a lot of different other teams when the rest of the AFC is investing in their quarterbacks and their passing game and everything like that. The Steelers are kind of saying, hey, we're going back to traditional football. We're running the football. We're ground and pound, and when we need to, we'll take a shot downfield.
Yep.
It's a lot on George Pickens, though. Like you said, I think he can be a superstar. I think he's got that potential. He's got to, he's going to have to grow up fast, and I don't think the Steelers, though, would have gone about their offseason in this way if they didn't believe that, if they didn't believe that George Pickens was ready to a certain extent, carry a passing offense, you know?
I look, I agree, and I'm pulling them up right now. Like, I think people gotta, to some degree, remember that, being away from football, as long as we've been away from football, we start to, it's tough to get a grip. You start to theorize on pretty much everything because you haven't watched actual football in a while. And there are like true-blooded superstars of, okay, that's awesome. I think that at times we have to take a moment to remember what George Pickens did when he was the number one in Pittsburgh. Like, when he had an offense to himself. I mean, he has 3, 4, 5 massive games last season, those massive games are 127 yards and a touchdown, 130 yards and a touchdown, 107 yards, 195 yards and 2 touchdowns, and then 131 yards. Like, when given an opportunity, George Pickens has made the most out of it. And I think that's why, like, I think everybody, ourselves included, have kind of like swarmed to the media outlook of George Pickens is like a really good number 2, and have somewhat forgot that like George Pickens has the potential to be one of the best number 1s in football. And you have to get to that potential. And I agree with you. Like, they're going against the grain and they're putting a lot on his shoulders. But I think that if you ask George, like, hey, do you want it on your shoulders? I think he'd smile and laugh and give you some like, yes, like, why would I not want it on my shoulders? I think he's had it on his shoulders his whole career. And I think this is an opportunity to be that guy. So I think that given the shot, I expect George to come out here and really like it take no time to be like, okay, guys, remember me? Like, you know, I'm one of the best young receivers in the NFL, and I think everybody should remember that. And with Arthur Smith running the show and a good quarterback who's, I mean, like, that was his biggest things last year. Matt Canada knew how to run one route with George Pickens, and it was straight. Once in a while, he told him to run across the field, but that's it. And Kenny Pickett threw a football about 2.5 seconds after somebody was open. So you're not really working with timing there. You get Russell Wilson in here who could probably utilize his you know, expectations or his reaction time a little bit better, and you get an offensive coordinator that actually knows how to work an offense. I just think things could happen when it comes to George. And then Roman, I think Roman's more of the question mark. Like, I think that's where it comes down to is like, what's the fall off? How big of a cliff are you jumping off after George Pickens? But I think the Steelers are going to be okay with taking a risk if they don't. Do you still see them as like an AFC, I don't want to say powerhouse, but have the potential to be a contender even if they don't get a wide receiver?
I do. You know, I think it does limit their ceiling a little bit, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Like, will you be able to compete with the Chiefs? I'm not super sure about that at this point. I think, you know, my prediction that they could, you know, make an AFC championship game, hang in that kind of game, was kind of contingent on them adding another piece at wide receiver. I think they can still get to an AFC championship game, but I think this path is much more narrow without, you know, a true-blooded number 2. If you're counting on Roman Wilson to get there, that's fine. That makes sense. Same with George Pickens being a superstar, but it's a narrower path, you know? You don't have as many other options. You don't get to be as multiple on offense. And so it's going to get not necessarily harder, but you just have to be very good at the things that you've declared that you will be very good at. So not impossible. I just think if one thing goes wrong, you know, if Roman Wilson isn't the guy, if George Pickens ends up not being able to reach that ceiling, then you're in a whole lot of trouble because there's not someone else that you can lean on. There's not a different way that you can win on offense.
Yeah, I agree. I do think you limit yourself. I do think you've put yourself in a position where one thing goes wrong, things are really, really in a tight spot. But I think that moves could be made if that happens. But I agree with you. I think that the road is more narrow and the risk is definitely much higher without adding that other guy that could be whoever you need him to be in that situation, because you don't want to bank on a 3rd-round rookie to come in here and be like, all right, you are now the number 1. Have fun. We got to win games. You know, like, that's not a spot that you want to be in. I agree. All right, let's talk about another trade here. Pro Football Network, I believe. Yes. Pro Football Network tossed out a trade proposal for the Pittsburgh Steelers saying, hey, why not get rid of Dan Moore Jr.? Everybody knows that you're probably going to get rid of Dan Moore Jr. But the trade that they tossed out here, I don't know if everybody's sold on. Their ideal situation, a place where they see this working out the best for both sides, is a trade with the Washington Commanders for a conditional 2025 6th-round pick. That, in their words, they say, quote, the Commanders will give 76th overall pick Brandon Coleman a chance to start at left tackle. They may want to bring in more depth, especially with the rookie quarterback and Jaden Daniels under center. Washington could contact the Steelers, who are overflowing with offensive line options after using 3 picks on O-line in 2024. With Troy Fautanu and Broderick Jones, Steelers' last 2 first-round picks, poised to start at tackle, Moore could be on the move as he enters his final season of his rookie contract. You hear conditional 6th-round pick for Dan Moore Jr., a guy that I don't think everybody's super high on, but I don't know how low they are either. I mean, your thoughts?
Yeah, this is kind of like he's our guy, so we can talk down about him, but you
Yeah.
can't say that about him. Like,
Yeah.
Dan Moore is so much better than a conditional 6th-round pick, man. Like, that's if I'm the Steelers, I'm not giving up a fairly valuable backup option for a conditional 6th-round pick, one that, I would say in all likelihood probably gets demoted to a 7th-round pick at some
Yeah.
point. So it's this trade does not make sense for the Steelers. I feel like the Commanders would love it, but you have a tackle with starting experience at worst. I believe Dan Moore is still on his rookie deal, on the last year of his rookie deal. Not like he is worth it or costing you a ton of money. Excuse me. So I don't think. I think Dan Moore, as much as I might not have a ton of faith in him, as much as I think Troy Fautanu is the guy, he's going to be your starter. He's going to surpass him. Dan Moore's worth more than that. This is a little undervaluing Dan Moore here, and I don't think it makes sense for the Steelers. Even if you don't think that he is all that great, he's worth more than this, and this doesn't really make as much sense for the Steelers.
No, I think there's zero chance the Pittsburgh Steelers would give up Dan Moore for anything less than a 4th-round pick. Like, I just don't. Maybe a 5th, depending on the team. But if Carolina called and said, hey, we need Dan Moore, like, all right, sounds good. Like, chances are that's the 32nd pick or the 33rd pick or whatever in the 4th round. It's pretty much a 4th-round pick. 6th-round pick just doesn't make any sense. Like, what are you giving up Dan Moore for? A draft pick that you're going to take a flyer on that chances are isn't going to work out. You're getting Ryan Watts. Like, no, not a move that I think anybody would be super excited about. It's a guy that you could feel how you want to feel about him and whether or not he should be a starter. But even as a backup, like, it makes more sense to have Dan Moore sit on your roster as, hey, we got to move Troy Fautanu to the right side and Dan's got to play the left side. Even if he was their backup, like, even if Spencer Anderson was the guy that came in here and proved, hey, I'm better than Dan Moore, I'm your swing tackle, Dan Moore is your Dylan Cook, like, that's still a better option than to get rid of him for a 6th-round pick. That just doesn't, at that point, just let him walk. Like, just, spend the year, keep a reserve. You're not missing out on anything. For a 6th-round pick, I mean, that's like almost nothing. Again, if it was a 5th-round pick, maybe you consider it. It's a 4th-round pick, you take it. A 6th-round pick, just, like, there's a limit to when a guy is more valuable than what you're going to get and what risk you're willing to take with not having him on the roster. And I don't think Dan Moore not being on this roster provides a whole ton of risk. I don't think the risk I think the risk is bigger than only getting a 6th-round pick from the Commanders.
Right. And this is something that we talked about earlier, but to make this kind of trade now, like,
yeah,
Dan Moore is going to be much more valuable later in the summer as well. Like, again, in this situation, the Commanders, the Brandon Coleman, the rookie.
Yep.
Does he maybe not show you that he's ready to be a starter right away, to protect your franchise quarterback right away? Damn, we really need Dan Moore to step in here. Damn, we really need a starting caliber left tackle. So the idea that the Steelers would not only give up a valuable backup, but also only get that kind of return for someone that they could just hold on to, someone whose value is only going to appreciate over the course of the summer, that makes no sense either. It's the kind of thing where you should hang on to Dan Moore maybe longer than you think you should, just because he's worth more to you as an asset in-house than he is than a future 6th-round pick, than a future day 3 pick.
Yeah, and especially right now, like, just like you said, like, what if Troy Fautanu doesn't work out? What if you deal with an injury? What if a billion things could happen? Like, to give up something for nothing right now makes absolutely zero sense. Come training camp, if everything works out in your favor and you're just like, okay, whatever. But like, that's the other thing is, like, as much as Dan Moore might have a ceiling, and it's a pretty low ceiling, he's a great locker room commodity. He's a great leader. Like, he's got a really good relationship with everybody in the Steelers locker room. He's a good face to have. Like, you want that. And at this point, he's not a kid anymore. He's a 4th-year veteran. Like, this guy's been in the league. He started a lot of games for the Pittsburgh Steelers. You want that guy around. And even last year, he was, like, very okay with, I have to do what I have to do to help this team because I might not be the starter in 2024 or 2023. Broderick Jones might come in here and beat me out for my job. And if that's the case, then I got to be able to play both sides of the line. I mean, Dan Moore has never shown like, hey, I'm not going to make this work with whatever opportunity I'm given. I think that's a guy that you want around, at least during training camp, and then you figure it out from there. Like, you want him in the building as much as you could possibly have him in the building for as long as you could possibly have him. And if that means going into the season, which I think it makes a lot of sense to trade Dan Moore during training camp, but even if that means going into the season and Dan Moore is the guy that you're sticking around and you want to use one of those lame excuses of like, hey, I don't want to hinder Troy Fautanu or Broderick Jones' development and we want veteran guys here, I agree with it. Like, I'm not going to argue it because I thought Mitch Trubisky and Matt Canada were the worst excuses you could possibly put on Kenny Pickett. If anything, it hurt them. Dan Moore is a complete opposite thing. You're not looking at Dan Moore to be like the guy that calls your offenses and fixes Troy Fautanu. You're just there to simply have some leadership and a guy that could mentor these guys. And Dan Moore has shown that he could do that very much so. So I'd have no problem with keeping him. I would not give him up for, like, you're not giving up that type of leadership and that type of veteran experience for a 6th-round pick. It's just not. There's like no chance it's happening. No chance.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense at all. Steelers can absolutely get a better return. I think Omar Khan knows that. He's not going to settle for something like this.
No, any trade that you could look at and say, I don't think that's worth it. Omar Khan has already laughed at and said, no chance. No, not happening. I could get 3 times those picks for Dan Moore Jr. No chance. All right, before we head out of here, want to talk a little bit of rookie minicamp. That's happening Friday, Saturday, Sunday. We'll get our first look at everybody that the Pittsburgh Steelers have brought in for the 2024 summer. A bunch of rookie minicamp tryouts. You know, we talked about Williams. There's a bunch of other names out there that are kind of very exciting. And then there's some undrafted guys that I think are kind of stealing the show. The Steelers draft picks are super exciting. What we're going to see out of Roman Wilson is awesome. What we're going to see out of Peyton Wilson is awesome. Troy Fautanu is probably going to be a freak right from the jump. And Zach Frazier and pads is probably going to get people excited. But there's some undrafted guys that I think have a bunch of upside with the Pittsburgh Steelers, and their track record of finding guys who are undrafted and making the most out of them holds as true as humanly possible. So every day from here until Friday, we're going to break down a little bit of Steelers rookie minicamp and what we expect going into there, kind of preview a little bit here and there for you guys so we could, you know, kind of touch on everything, give everybody an idea of what we're looking at. When it comes to the undrafted guys, because I think that's the best place to start. That's the most exciting. Hey, what's going to happen with these guys? We don't know. There are some big names out there. I mean, obviously, Beanie Bishop's the big one, but you have a bunch of other ones. You look at the UDFA class and everything that they've done and everybody they brought in. What's the guy, who's the name that you expect to make the 53-man roster?
Yeah, I think it's Georgia running back Dajuan Edwards. He is really interesting to me. I think, especially given what we know about Najee Harris and what we've talked about, you know, in terms of his relationship with the Steelers and clearly what they think of his value. I still see Najee as a trade candidate, quite honestly. Like, I wouldn't be shocked if they trade him this offseason, and that's where Edwards steps in and kind of could be, I don't know, a guy that steps up and gives you some valuable touches. This is a guy who has to be smart to play in Georgia's offense. He's experienced, and he's a tough runner. I feel like he fits into what the Steelers want to do. Scored a ton of touchdowns for Georgia over the course of his career. He was a guy who can really bully his way into the end zone. I like him a lot, and I think that he could end up, you know, it's a certain situation. You know, he's not going to take snaps over Jaylen Warren or even Cordell Patterson or especially not Najee Harris. But if a position opens up, I think the Steelers could look at this guy as a really valuable fail-safe. He's definitely someone that you'd want to try to, at the very least, hide in the practice squad. But I don't know if you're going to be able to keep him around as a practice squad guy. I think people are going to look at the tape. They're going to look at his pedigree coming from Georgia, and they're going to see him as really valuable. I don't think he'd last on the practice squad. I think he's a guy that you've got to kind of try and lock down pretty early, quite honestly.
That's I mean, best shot to make the 53-man roster. I feel like that's a ballsy pick there. It's not a bad one, but a lot lying on it. What's your percentage you think Najee gets traded as of right now?
Oh, it's not high. I mean, only like, you know, I mean, before the end of rookie minicamp, obviously, or like
No, I'm just mean at any point this summer.
I'd probably put it at, I'd say 20%.
Okay.
Maybe like 18, but like, I don't think it's likely, but I just think Edwards is a guy that, I don't know, a fourth running back isn't that big of it's not someone that we saw them last year, like the guys that they brought in at running back last year to kind of fill some training camp spots to give them some bodies there. Like they were cycling through a ton of guys. If you can have Edwards just fill that, I feel like he is extremely valuable to have at least on the training camp roster. And I feel like once you see him on the field, once you see him move in pads, and once you see him run the way that he can, I feel like it's going to be hard to say, nah, we don't need this guy at all.
That's remember the dude from Penn State that showed up for about an hour and a half?
Yeah, John something, right?
John Lovett.
John Lovett.
Yeah. Hope that guy's doing well. One time, I'm not going to give out names, but one time we're hanging out in the locker room. I don't know if you were there with us. Sitting in the locker room. It's like the end of the season, and there's these group of players joking about something, and they're laughing hard. And all I hear come out of somebody's mouth was, "Yeah, dude, I don't think that dude ever took a snap again." And I was like, "What are we talking about?" And everybody's like, "Dude, remember that running back that Mark Robb and then E-Rob absolutely killed like 10 minutes after he showed up?" I was like, "Oh yeah, dude, that guy, I don't think he ever made it back on the field." They're like, "Yeah, dude, we never saw him again. Like he left and we never saw him again." I was like, "Nice." That John Lovett, man, he was one of many. And I'll say this, fans were pumped about this. Like anybody who watched Penn State football was like, "Dude, John Lovett, he was a stud at Penn State. Like that's a guy that could come in here." Lasted about, no lie, 30 minutes. 30 minutes max before he went back to back. Mike Tomlin was like, "John, you're going up against Mark Robinson." Mark smoked him. This was backs on backers. And then the very next rep, he was like, "You're staying here. E-Rob, you're up." And I was like, are you doing this on purpose? You just flew this guy in to be a punching bag? This is just mean. Lasted 30 minutes max.
Yeah, you could have put a tackling dummy up, and that would have been just as I don't know. You didn't need to put a human being, a body in the way of those two guys just to beat him up a little bit.
No, it was bad. I felt terrible. He literally never showed up. You never saw him again. I saw him one time jogging on the sideline, and I was like, "Oh, John Lovett, he made it back, huh?" Never. Then he was gone. As soon as they get rid of him, he was gone. Edwards is a good one. Interesting name. I think that. I mean, I love what they brought in Edwards. I agree with you. I think that if you go to Georgia and you play running back, you got a ton of potential. And if you score as many touchdowns as he scored his senior year, you got a ton of potential. Plus, he's a brick. So if you're gonna bring in a power back, I like that, especially later in the roster, somebody who could develop. I think that's a good name to watch. I think the obvious one is Beanie Bishop, and I think we have to mention Beanie Bishop. I think he's a guy that, like, if I had to take a shot, he's probably in my 53-man roster throughout the summer unless we show up at rookie minicamp and he's terrible, but I have a hard time thinking that's going to happen. All-American at West Virginia, absolute stud, dude that we did not think wasn't going to get drafted, was very surprised that he didn't get drafted. I think Beanie Bishop is a name that everybody's going to mention, is going to be the easy one. To give you a bit of a curveball here, a guy that I think has a really good shot of making the 53-man roster is John Rice Plumlee, quarterback, UCF, dude who's super athletic, who could come in here. I'm not totally sold Kyle Allen is a guy that's going to make this 53-man roster. I think they like that they brought him in, but I don't know. You brought Plumlee in to see what you could do with him, and you need young backup quarterbacks for the future, and Plumlee might have the potential to be that, and I think that they could keep him around. He's got a strong arm. He's super athletic. If you could get this guy to, I don't know, at least be capable of showing that he could develop into something, I think it's much easier to keep him around and then toss a name like Kyle Allen on the practice squad or something and work that way.
Yeah, I like Plumlee a lot too. I think he's the same, kind of caliber of athlete as Fields or kind of on the same level generally as Fields or Russell Wilson. I feel like he's going to end up fitting, I think, a little bit better into what the Steelers want to do than a Kyle Allen would. I mean, I think even, Allen is, if the season started tomorrow and, Russell Wilson and Justin Fields drop dead for some reason, you're going to start Kyle Allen. But I think as the season progresses, if you see that, Plumlee can kind of mentally catch up to the NFL level, if he can pick up the offense really well, like he has a real chance to be a guy who can be your third quarterback, your emergency quarterback on game days. I like Plumlee a lot. That's like, saying at the top of the show, like he was electric in college, like
Yes.
a really fun player to watch. So I think there's a ton of potential there that could be really, really intriguing for the Steelers as they kind of search for that third option, that third guy.
Yeah, and I don't think Plumlee makes the 53-man roster. For some reason, Russ and Justin can't play, and it's like an extended period of time. I got a hard time. I mean, Kyle Allen, maybe that's the direction that you're going to go, but I have a hard time believing that they don't call the name like Ryan Tannehill or whoever, off the streets and say, come play quarterback. We need you for 6 weeks. Like, Arthur Smith's offense. Come make it work. And they make it work. Like, I have a hard time believing that they'd throw away a potentially successful season to be like, yeah, this is our guy. Kyle Allen's our starter. And I think Plumlee's the same way. Like, I don't think that third quarterback on the Steelers 53-man roster means anything outside of who has the most potential to grow, who's going to be the best practice quarterback. I think Plumlee fits that, especially in the AFC North. Like, if you need a guy to replicate Deshaun Watson and Lamar Jackson and Joe Burrow, Plumlee could do it all. So I think that's the name that makes the most sense for them. And I think he's got a real shot of making the 53-man roster if he's not terrible. If you're absolutely terrible, right. Chris Oladokun, people want to talk about he never got an opportunity. Chris Oladokun was terrible. Like, in his limited reps, that guy did very little to impress.
In all 7 throws he got or whatever, I don't know.
None of them were good.
We still haven't seen the best of Chris Oladokun, mark my words.
Hey,
okay,
two-time Super Bowl champion right there.
That's right. Yeah.
2-time Super Bowl champion. Look, if that's what happens with Plumlee and he turns into 2-time Super Bowl champion elsewhere, I'm gonna respect him. But I think we gotta need to see a little bit more. I wasn't stunned that Chris Oladokun didn't beat out Mason Rudolph. I might have different thoughts with John Rice Plumlee, and he also spells his name pretty crazy because you think Rice is spelled Rice. No. Rhys. Rice.
0 vowels. I mean, unless you can count Y, but
that's that's like picking how you spell gray. Yeah. There's no right answer. All right. With that said, we're going to head out of here. Thank you guys so much for jumping on to another episode of All Steelers Talk. Make sure to subscribe to us on YouTube, youtube.com/All Steelers Talk. Check us out anywhere you get your podcast. And as we've been saying, check out our new YouTube channel, youtube.com/All Steelers Talk for even more All Steelers Talk. I say All Steelers Talk about a dozen times in this exit. So we're going to reframe that. That's going to be my mission. I'm going to spend all of Italy just reworking how I get out of this show. That's going to be it.
I'm sure Jillian will love that. That's going to be.
She'll be like, "What are you doing? Are you writing poems and stuff on the balcony in Rome?" Be like, actually working on an intro and an exit for the podcast. But yeah, pretty much the same thing. A poem to me. Poem
to the listeners.
That's exactly. Find all our work at si.com/NFL.Steelers. And as always, enjoy another beautiful day in the Berg. Peace.